What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today, we're going to be looking at a submachine gun that I think doesn't get nearly enough love, and that's probably because its more flashier cousin, the Thunder Cage, is considered to be a superior weapon due to the fact that it's much better in AoE situations as well as much better at stacking crit. Of course, I am referring to the Python, or just Python, and this has pretty much been relegated to being a stat stick for Freyna for like the longest time. I don't really see a lot of people running this, and I've actually started running this a lot in, like, let's say non-boss based content when I'm taking, you know, on like infiltrations, something like that, yellow bar enemies, outposts and stuff like that, and I've been really happy with this. And one of the reasons why we've rebuilt Python and why I've kind of like refocused on this weapon is because with the October 10th patch, we got new mods which allowed us to tech our weapons and our descendants differently than previously always being sort of like pigeonholed into crit, because it was the only additional way that we could increase the damage for our descendants or weapons. Now we have mods that actually decrease our crit stats and actually increase our firepower stats basically, and that's really good for weapons and descendants who already have very low crit stats to begin with, so that the penalty necessarily isn't all that bad. So when we look at the Python itself, and I'm just going to go in over here, when we look at its unique ability, and this is one of the reasons why it's kind of like flavored for toxic based characters, is that it has an ability called Prey, right? And this says that when you hit a weak point, it inflicts a unique ability, Prey. This has a duration of 2 seconds. It has max stacks of 28. And then what it does is it essentially reduces the resistance of whatever you're shooting to non-attribute and toxin. So those two elements, damage originating from those two elements, are going to deal more damage to it. And this is one of the reasons why this weapon is so perfectly suited for Freyna. But basically it's mostly just seen as a way for you to essentially make Freyna's skills better by just reducing the resistance. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to also just make a build that actually lets the Python deal like a fair amount of damage. And I think that we've arrived at that point. So when we look at the actual build itself, you can see that essentially I've stepped away from any mods that give me any crit or any you know, like crit damage, but I've basically tried to focus in on the things that make the Python really good. Namely, the fact that it deals a lot of weak point damage because it has a fairly high weak point multiplier, and then the fact that it also just deals a fair amount of DPS via a fairly okay-ish firearm stat. So first things first, we've got the staples, as I would call them here on the weapon, which is your the four trinity, or maybe the 3 trinity is the best one. I think expand weapon charge is kind of like necessary a lot as well of the times, but let's say rifling, fire rate up, and action and reaction is like kind of like the holy trinity, right? But then we also put expand weapon charge in there, and we put weapon tuning in there. Both of these give us more rounds per magazine because the Python has a fairly small magazine to begin with. And yes, adding more multipliers on a very small multiplier already is not, you know, that great. But in the end, we have to bring its clip size up by every which way we can, or, you know, magazine size for those that are weird about that shit. So the point is, we can, with those 2 mods and with what we're going to see on the rolls on the weapon, we can get up to 53 bullets per magazine, or rounds per magazine before I get shit for that, and that's fairly decent, right? Then the thing is, because this weapon functions around the whole toxin mechanic, we're just going to lean into that like super heavily. So we're also going to put toxic enhancement on there, as well as toxic conductor. Toxic enhancement adds toxic onto it, and then toxic conductor gives us more firearm attack when you shoot something that's been poisoned. So those two together, just super sexy. Then what we're doing is we're adding in a mod which was introduced on October 10th, and this says charge amplification, which increases your firearm attack by a fairly decent amount, 67%, but then crushes your crit hit damage. Now already, if we look at our stats over here, we start with a very low base, and then our crit damage multiplier is also very low. So the effect here is kind of like not felt because there was very little to begin with in the first place. Then, because weak point damage is, first of all, the trigger mechanism for the special effect of Python, but also because that's what we should be shooting with this, because we want to be dealing as much damage as possible, we lean into weak point damage. So we have weak point sight, which is our blue mod, which gives us more weak point damage, and we also have weak point detection, which gives us some more weak point damage, as well as a little bit of additional firearm attack. Now this altogether is the package for the weapon and gives us a super sexy 3.1 rather weak point damage multiplier. I was like, dude, it wasn't that high before. Okay, so 3.1 times multiplier on that. So that then means that when we combine some decent substat rolls on here, we have a fairly solid weapon that doesn't rely on crits at all and just pushes a whole bunch of damage through. My substat choices here was, of course, taking firearm attack and then taking toxic attack. So even if we were to deviate off of some of our toxic mods or something like that to put something else there, maybe you want the weapon to have less recoil or something like that, you still have another way to introduce toxic, which is super important if you want to benefit from the unique effect. And we have weak point damage for more weak point, and we have some additional rounds per magazine. So you can see I don't have any crit rolls on here. I also don't have any rolls for Colossus, because while you can use this in a Colossus fight, I definitely think there are much stronger contenders for weapons to take into a Colossus fight. A very good example of another general rounds gun, which is absolutely light years ahead of the Python when it comes to this, is Enduring Legacy. So you are actively kind of like damaging your damage by not using Enduring Legacy in almost every single Void Intercept boss fight. But nonetheless, when it comes to the other encounters and dealing with, like I said, yellow bars, outposts, 400 infiltrations, those bosses, this gun really does chunk their health, and I'm super happy with it. That's gonna be it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know what you think of the Python. Have you started kind of like checking out some of the other weapons now that we have those new mods in hand and people have started to farm them up a little bit more and actually have them? Some of them are only available through combining, or your best chance of getting them are only through combining, and so it's been sort of like a slow process of getting all of them, but I'm finally, I think I need like 2 or 3 more, so I'm good to go. But yes, this Python, I was super happy with it. It's also for me a case of like, of course Thunder Cage is great, Enduring Legacy is good, there are Secret Garden is fantastic, Greg's Reverse Fate is good. These are all really strong weapons in the game, but once you start playing for more than 50, 60, 70, 100, 120, 150, 200 hours and then upwards, really variety starts becoming the spice of life. And it's also nice to check out some other things every once in a while. We have also seen that the developer is quite into like tweaking weapons and stuff like that, so it's not to say that any of the guns that we're using right now might not be better or worse in the future as they adjust some of these values up or down. There's certainly been a move from their side to bring some of the outliers up and kind of make them better. And so not that I'm calling Python an outlier, but if they put any form of additional buff on this weapon, then it is going to be meta as fuck. Other than that, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Till next video, fucking cheers.